She stood at the front of the classroom, Petite and Professorial, explaining combat theory to Navy SEAL trainees who had no interest in her academic approach. The mockery was quiet at first, then open and hostile. When the class leader suddenly grabbed her by the throat, pinning her against the wall, he expected submission. What happened next shocked everyone in the room. In 3 devastating seconds, she broke his grip, dislocated his shoulder, and had him face down on the ground. The commander's words changed everything. At ease, Major. These elite trainees had just learned their first real lesson. The morning sun cast long shadows across the obstacle course at Naval Special Warfare Training Command in Coronado. Mud-covered trainees hauled their exhausted bodies through the final evolution, faces etched with determination and pain. Commander Blackwood observed with a critical stopwatch in hand, as the last recruit crossed the finish line. 5-minute break, then classroom, he barked. Trainee Merrick Davenport pulled himself to his feet first. At 6'4" with broad shoulders and a confident stance, he commanded respect among his peers. As class leader and third-generation military, he'd set course records and outperformed even the instructor's expectations. The other recruits gravitated toward him naturally as they trudged toward the classroom building. Inside, they found something unexpected. A woman arranging papers at the front desk, petite with wire-rimmed glasses and auburn hair pulled into a tight bun. She wore pressed khakis and a button-down shirt rather than tactical gear. The recruits exchanged confused glances as they filed into their seats. Training Officer River Tannhauser entered, his expression tighter than usual. Attention! The class snapped upright. Beginning today, all Phase 2 candidates will spend 4 hours weekly in advanced asymmetric warfare theory. He gestured to the woman without enthusiasm. This is Dr. Aloan Thorp. She'll be leading this new addition to your curriculum. Dr. Thorp stepped forward. Good morning. I understand you've been focused primarily on physical conditioning and basic tactical skills. Today, we'll begin exploring the cognitive aspects of modern warfare. From the back row, someone stifled a laugh. Davenport's eyebrow arched slightly as Dr. Thorp began discussing cognitive bias and battlefield decisions. The energy in the room shifted. Recruits slouched in their seats. Some exchanged smirks. Davenport, however, watched her with narrowed eyes. With respect, ma'am, he finally interrupted, his deep voice cutting through her lecture. We're here to learn how to fight, not philosophize. The enemy won't care about cognitive whatever when we're clearing buildings. Several recruits chuckled. Dr. Thorp paused, studying Davenport with unnerving stillness. Interesting perspective, trainee. Davenport. Merrick Davenport. Trainee Davenport. Would you mind demonstrating the standard room clearing procedure you've been taught? Use the classroom as your environment. Davenport stood confidently, moving to the door. With practiced precision, he entered, sweeping his imaginary weapon across the room, calling out positions and executing the procedure flawlessly. When he finished, he turned to Dr. Thorp with a satisfied expression. Textbook, she acknowledged. Now, let me point out the 7 fatal flaws in your approach. For the next 10 minutes, she dissected his performance with surgical precision, referencing angles of fire, psychological tendencies of cornered combatants, and architectural vulnerabilities he'd overlooked. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. As she wrote on the whiteboard, her sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing a jagged scar circling her wrist. She adjusted her cuff quickly, but trainee Zephyr Calloway noticed, his eyes lingering on her arm with curiosity. Your assignment, Dr. Thorp concluded, is to read these materials before our next session. She distributed papers with dense text and complex diagrams. We'll be discussing how perception shapes tactical response in asymmetrical engagements. As the recruits filed out, Davenport lingered behind. Dr. Thorp, he said, his voice carefully controlled. This might work at a university, but SEAL training is different. We need practical skills, not theory. She met his gaze steadily. And what happens, trainee Davenport, when strength isn't enough. Something in her tone made him hesitate before responding. That's not a scenario we train for, ma'am. Perhaps, she replied, turning back to her notes, that's precisely the problem. The following day, the recruits arrived to find Dr. Thorp setting up a projector. She'd replaced her button-down with a simple black t-shirt, revealing toned arms and what appeared to be a burned scar on her forearm. If she noticed their glances, she gave no indication. Today, we're analyzing failed operations, she announced without preamble. Specifically, how cognitive bias affected tactical decisions with catastrophic outcomes. She clicked through slides showing operational failures from recent conflicts. With each example, she broke down the mental errors that had preceded the physical ones, explaining concepts like anchoring bias and availability heuristics in combat contexts. Davenport watched with growing irritation. When Dr. Thorp described a mission where operators had relied on physical superiority rather than situational awareness, resulting in preventable casualties, he raised his hand. How does understanding why past teams failed help us succeed? We need to be stronger, faster, and more aggressive than the enemies we'll face. Dr. Thorp considered him. Strength without direction is just wasted energy. Trainee Davenport, the strongest operator I ever knew, died because he couldn't adapt when his physical advantage was neutralized. The use of "I knew" rather than "I read about" caught Calloway's attention again. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. As the week progressed, the class's resistance to Dr. Thorp's method solidified. Davenport had become the unofficial leader of this opposition, challenging her at every turn. What bothered him most wasn't her criticism of their tactics, but the quiet certainty with which she delivered it, as though speaking from a place he couldn't access. By Friday, tension filled the classroom before Dr. Thorp even arrived. When she entered carrying a case of equipment, the room fell silent. Today we're discussing sensory manipulation in combat environments, she explained, removing what looked like modified night vision equipment from the case. How enemies can exploit your perception to create advantage. She demonstrated specialized devices designed to disorient operators through light, sound, and environmental manipulation. As she explained each technique, she included practical countermeasures. The human brain processes sensory information in predictable patterns, she explained. When those patterns are disrupted, even elite operators can become functionally compromised within seconds. So what's the solution? Asked a recruit named Fallon. If our senses can be manipulated, how do we compensate? Excellent question, Dr. Thorp replied. The answer lies in training your brain to recognize manipulation and maintain operational capacity through it. Next week, we'll begin practical exercises. This announcement triggered a ripple of interest, the first genuine engagement she'd received. Even Davenport appeared grudgingly curious. After class, Dr. Thorp met with Commander Blackwood in his office. Through the window, she could see recruits running drills on the beach, their movements precise and coordinated. They're resisting, Blackwood stated, reviewing her weekly report. I expected that, she replied. Physical superiority is their identity. Suggesting it might be insufficient threatens that identity. Davenport is the key, Blackwood said. Turn him and the others will follow. Dr. Thorp watched the recruits outside. He's talented but dangerously overconfident. That combination gets operators killed. Exactly why he needs what you're teaching, Blackwood responded. The question is whether he'll accept it before he forces our hand. The following Monday, Dr. Thorp arrived to find a crude drawing on the whiteboard, a stick figure with glasses being carried away by a muscular stick figure labeled "Reality Check." She erased it without comment and began setting up for the day's lesson. Calloway entered early, hesitating at the door. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize for that." He gestured toward the erased board. It wasn't right. She regarded him thoughtfully. I've been called worse things by more dangerous people, Trainee Calloway. He shifted uncomfortably. Some of us are actually interested in what you're teaching, especially after you mention practical applications. But not everyone shares your curiosity, she supplied. Davenport has influence, Calloway admitted. He's the best we've got physically, so the others follow his lead. Dr. Thorp nodded. That's often how it works, until it doesn't. As the class assembled, Dr. Thorp announced they would be conducting practical exercises in sensory manipulation. She divided them into teams and distributed specialized equipment. Each team will attempt to complete an objective while the opposing team uses these devices to create disorientation. The goal is to recognize when your perception is being manipulated and maintain effectiveness despite it. For the first time, genuine enthusiasm spread through the class. Even Davenport seemed engaged as they moved to the training facility. The exercise proved more challenging than anticipated. Teams that had excelled in physical training found themselves completely disoriented by the sensory manipulation devices. Frustration mounted as elite candidates stumbled through basic tasks. Dr. Thorp observed without comment, making notes as each team failed to complete their objectives. Only when the final team, led by Davenport, returned in defeat did she gather them for debriefing. This was meant to fail, she explained. Your brains haven't been trained to recognize and compensate for sensory manipulation. Over the next few weeks, we'll develop those pathways. This feels like a waste of time, Davenport muttered loud enough for others to hear. When we're downrange, we won't be playing with lights and sounds. Dr. Thorp's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened. In Ramadi, 2012, 3 operators were killed because insurgents used precisely these techniques to separate and isolate them from their unit. The mission failed because those operators, despite their physical prowess, had never trained for perceptual manipulation. The specificity of her example silenced Davenport momentarily. This isn't theoretical, she continued. It's happening in real combat situations right now. The enemy adapts. If you don't adapt faster, you die. As the class ended, the recruits filed out with mixed expressions. Some appeared thoughtful, others remained skeptical. Davenport lingered again, watching Dr. Thorp pack her equipment. You talk like you've seen combat, he said finally. She closed her case before responding. I talk like someone who understands that the mind is both your greatest weapon and your greatest vulnerability, Trainee Davenport. Whether you believe that could determine whether you survive your first real engagement. He stared at her for a long moment. The guys are saying you're just here because of some diversity initiative. That you've never seen what it's actually like out there. She held his gaze, her expression unreadable. People often underestimate threats they don't recognize, Trainee. That's another cognitive bias we'll cover next week. 3 weeks later, the classroom atmosphere had deteriorated from skepticism to open hostility. Dr. Thorp stood at the front reviewing the tactical simulation Davenport's team had completed the previous day. Your approach was fundamentally flawed, she explained, highlighting points on the diagram. While technically correct according to your manual, this entry pattern creates a fatal funnel. In Fallujah, a similar approach resulted in 4 casualties during Operation Fractured Spear. With all due respect, Dr. Thorp, Davenport cut in, his patience visibly worn. This isn't something you learn from books. These tactics have been field-tested by actual operators. Dr. Thorp set down her marker. The Aliskari district has unique architectural features that render standard approaches ineffective. The sight lines from upper floors create interlocking fields of fire that would catch your team in a crossfire approximately 7 seconds after breaching. The specificity of her example hung in the air. Several recruits straightened in their seats. And how exactly would you know that? Davenport challenged. The same way I know that operators who rely exclusively on physical advantage have the highest casualty rates in sustained engagements, she replied evenly. Data and experience. As she continued the lesson, Calloway noticed her unconsciously touch her side when discussing chest wounds, a gesture too personal for academic knowledge. When she mentioned the psychological impact of a first combat kill, describing the sensory distortions and time dilation with uncomfortable accuracy, Davenport's expression darkened. How would you know anything about what it's like to take a life? He snapped, standing abruptly. The classroom fell silent. Something flickered across Dr. Thorp's face, not anger but something colder, before she composed herself. Page 94 in your reading discusses the neurological impacts of combat stress, she responded calmly. Let's continue with our analysis of urban engagement tactics. The dismissal of his outburst left Davenport seething. As class ended, he remained in his seat while others filed out. A few lingered by the door, sensing the tension. Dr. Thorp, Davenport approached her desk, voice low but intense. I think it's time we address the elephant in the room. You're teaching warfare to men who will actually fight while you've never seen combat. It's not just ineffective, it's dangerous. She continued organizing her papers. Your concern is noted, Trainee Davenport. No, I don't think you understand. He moved closer. These men are following me into battle someday, not you. Your theories undermine everything we've worked for. Leadership isn't about being the strongest person in the room, she replied, finally looking up at him. It's about understanding when strength isn't the answer. Something snapped in Davenport. In a swift motion, he grabbed her by the throat, backing her against the wall. The remaining trainees froze in shock. This is what real combat feels like, Dr. Thorp, he growled. This is what we're preparing for, not your classroom theories. Real physical threat. For one heartbeat, Dr. Thorp remained still, her eyes locked on his. Then everything changed. The academic vanished. Her eyes sharpened with a cold, calculating focus. In 3 precise movements, a blur too fast to follow, she broke his grip, twisted his arm behind him, dislocated his shoulder with a sickening pop, and drove him face first into the floor, her knee pressed into his back, his arm hyperextended at a dangerous angle, completely immobilized with minimal apparent effort. The classroom fell absolutely silent except for Davenport's pained breathing. The door opened. Commander Blackwood entered, surveyed the scene without surprise. At ease, Major, he said quietly. Major, not Doctor. Dr. Thorp released her hold and stepped back, straightening her clothing as Davenport remained stunned on the floor. Commander Blackwood helped Davenport to his feet, the recruit's face twisted in pain, his arm hanging uselessly at his side. The commander turned to address the frozen classroom. Gentlemen, it seems appropriate to properly introduce your instructor. His voice carried an edge of disappointment directed not at Dr. Thorp, but at them. This is former Major Aloan Thorp, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, SEAL Team 6. Callsign, Wraith. The silence deepened as the implications sank in. 15 years of operational experience. Silver Star recipient. Purple Heart. Pioneer of the cognitive warfare tactics that revolutionized our urban engagement protocols. He paused, letting each achievement land. And the sole survivor of Operation Obsidian Shield. Recognition flashed across several faces. Operation Obsidian Shield, the classified mission that had changed special warfare doctrine but came at a terrible cost. Commander Blackwood opened a folder displaying a heavily redacted mission file. The tactics you've been mocking for weeks are the same ones that changed how we conduct urban operations. They've saved hundreds of lives, including potentially yours. Davenport stood mortified, face pale, career visibly crumbling before him. Major Thorp was medically retired after surviving an ambush that killed her entire team, Blackwood continued. She's here because we recognize that physical training alone isn't preparing operators for the complexity of modern warfare. Dr. Thorp, Major Thorp, remained composed, her academic demeanor back in place, the lethal operator once again concealed beneath the scholarly exterior. You're dismissed, Blackwood told the class. Davenport, Medical Bay. As the stunned recruits filed out, Calloway glanced back at Thorp with newfound understanding. The scars, the specific knowledge, the quiet confidence, all suddenly making sense. The morning after the incident, Dr. Thorp arrived at the classroom to find it empty except for Commander Blackwood. We've suspended training for 24 hours, he explained. The men needed time to process. She nodded, setting down her materials. And Davenport? Medical evaluation completed. His shoulder will heal, but his future here is uncertain. He was acting on deeply held beliefs, she said. Misguided, but genuine. Blackwood studied her. You could have neutralized him without causing injury. Yes, she agreed. But he needed to understand the consequences of his assumptions. Sometimes pain is the most effective teacher. The men are shaken, Blackwood said. Finding out their instructor is Wraith, the ghost of Obsidian Shield, has recontextualized everything. She looked away. They needed to understand that the theory I'm teaching comes from experience, not academia. Was it necessary to hide your identity in the first place? Would they have learned differently if they'd known? She countered. Their respect would have been based on my reputation, not my knowledge. That reinforces exactly the mindset we're trying to change. Blackwood nodded slowly. Well, they certainly know now. The question is, what happens next? That evening, Dr. Thorp found Davenport alone in the medical bay, staring at the wall, his arm in a sling. She closed the door behind her and took a seat across from him. They're processing your separation paperwork, he said without looking at her. Assaulting an instructor. Career over. She studied him for a moment. Is that what you want? Now he did look at her, confusion evident. What I want? I assaulted a superior officer. What I want doesn't matter. It matters to me, she replied. Because I haven't signed off on the paperwork yet. Davenport's eyes narrowed. Why wouldn't you? I grabbed you by the throat in front of witnesses. You did, she acknowledged. Because you believed I was a civilian academic with no combat experience, teaching theory that could get you and your men killed. From that perspective, your actions, while unacceptable, were motivated by concern for your team. She leaned forward slightly. I respect that instinct, Trainee Davenport. It's the foundation of good leadership. The problem wasn't your protective impulse. It was your assumptions and how you acted on them. So what now? He asked, genuine uncertainty in his voice. That depends on you, she replied. You can accept separation and leave this program with your assumptions intact, or you can accept that your understanding of combat effectiveness was incomplete and remain in the program to expand that understanding. After what happened, you'd let me stay. Dr. Thorp's expression was unreadable. Physical strength kept me alive twice, she told him. Mental discipline saved me 17 times. If you're willing to develop both, then yes, I'd let you stay. Why? He asked, genuinely confused. Because the best operators I knew weren't the strongest or the fastest. They were the ones who could admit when they were wrong and learn from it. Davenport looked down at his injured shoulder, then back at her. I was wrong, he said quietly. About you? About what matters in combat. I'd like to learn, if you're willing to teach me. She nodded once. Training resumes at 0800 tomorrow. Don't be late. The following morning, Dr. Thorp entered the classroom to find the recruits standing at attention, including Davenport, his arm still in a sling. The atmosphere had transformed completely, respect replacing hostility. Seats, she said. As they settled, she surveyed the room. Yesterday's events have altered our dynamic. I understand you have questions. Before we continue with our curriculum, I'll address them. Hands went up throughout the room. She pointed to Calloway first. Ma'am, is it true you were the only survivor of Operation Obsidian Shield? Something flickered in her eyes, a momentary window into carefully contained pain. Yes. My team was ambushed during an extraction. 7 operators lost. I sustained multiple injuries but managed to complete the mission objective and extract with critical intelligence. Is that how you got the scar on your wrist? Another recruit asked. She glanced at her arm. No, that came from a different operation. Captured by insurgents in Kandahar. Restraints left permanent damage to the nerves and tendons. The questions continued, each answer revealing pieces of a career none of them had imagined. She answered with clinical detachment, as though discussing someone else's experiences, but occasionally a flicker of emotion would surface before being carefully contained. Finally, Davenport raised his hand. The room tensed slightly. "Major," he began, the title an acknowledgement. "You said the strongest operator you knew died because he couldn't adapt when his physical advantage was neutralized. Who was that?" Dr. Thorp held his gaze for a long moment. "My team leader on my first deployment. Chief Petty Officer Garrett Davenport." The surname hung in the air. Davenport's face drained of color. "Your father," she confirmed. "He saved my life twice before his own was lost. He was the strongest, most capable operator I'd ever seen. But he relied on that strength exclusively. When we were separated from our unit and he sustained injuries that compromised his physical advantage, he couldn't adapt his approach." The room was absolutely silent. "That's why I'm here," she continued, addressing the entire class now. "Because Garrett Davenport was worth 10 of me physically, but he never developed the cognitive tools to complement that strength, and it cost him his life." She turned back to the whiteboard. "Today, we'll discuss tactical flexibility under physical impairment. You will all, at some point in your careers, find yourselves in situations where your physical capabilities are compromised. Your survival will depend on what's in your mind, not what's in your muscles." As she began the lesson, the recruits took notes with unprecedented focus. Davenport especially wrote furiously, occasionally glancing up at Dr. Thorp with an expression that had transformed from hostility to something approaching reverence. The dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The academic had revealed herself as the warrior, and in doing so had opened a path for these trainees to become something more than they had imagined possible. In the weeks that followed, the training program transformed. What had been perfunctory attendance became focused engagement. The classroom dynamic shifted from resistance to reverence, with recruits arriving early and staying late to absorb everything Major Thorp offered. For Davenport, the revelation about his father had created a personal mission. He approached training with newfound humility, his questions thoughtful rather than challenging. Despite his injury, he participated fully, adapting to his physical limitations exactly as Thorp had taught. 1 month after the confrontation, Commander Blackwood observed a session from the back of the room. Major Thorp had the recruits blindfolded, navigating an obstacle course while responding to complex tactical scenarios. "You've lost your primary weapon and sustained injuries to your dominant arm," she announced. "Hostile forces approaching from your 3 o'clock. 2 civilians in your care. What's your response, Fallon?" The recruit hesitated, then detailed a strategic retreat using terrain features he couldn't see but had memorized earlier. His solution prioritized civilian safety while conserving limited resources. "Good," Thorp acknowledged. "Davenport, same scenario, but add a compressed timeline. Hostiles will reach your position in 30 seconds. Without hesitation, Davenport outlined a different approach involving misdirection and psychological tactics to create the appearance of a larger defensive force. His strategy showed a sophisticated understanding of enemy perception. "Excellent," she said. "The solution recognizes that perception can be weaponized when physical advantage is compromised." After class, Blackwood approached Thorp as the recruits filed out. "Impressive progress. Especially Davenport." She nodded. "He's internalized the principles faster than I expected. His father would be proud. And the others? They're adapting well. Calloway shows particular aptitude for asymmetrical thinking. Fallon excels at resource management under constraint. Together, they'll make a formidable unit." Blackwood studied her. "You've done more than teach them tactical theory, Major. You've changed how they see themselves." "That was always the objective," she replied. "Physical training creates capable bodies. Mental training creates adaptable operators. Both are necessary for survival." That evening, Thorp found Davenport in the training facility running modified drills, his injured arms still immobilized. He had developed a system of movement that accommodated his limitation while maintaining tactical effectiveness. Working late, Trainee Davenport? He straightened, slightly breathless. Yes, ma'am. Adapting to the injury as instructed. She observed his setup with approval. Your modifications show ingenuity. Most operators would focus on rehabilitating the injury before returning to tactical training. Time isn't always a luxury in the field, he replied, echoing her words from an earlier lesson. Adaptation must be immediate and effective. She nodded. Your father struggled with that concept. He believed recovery was necessary before adaptation. Davenport hesitated, then asked the question that had been haunting him. Were you there when he died? Yes, she answered simply. We were separated from our unit during an operation in Helmand Province. He sustained multiple injuries defending our position. When the environment changed, requiring different tactics, he couldn't shift his approach. Did he suffer? Her expression softened slightly. No. It was quick. And he died completing the mission. He considered that the only acceptable outcome. Davenport absorbed this, his face a complex mixture of grief and pride. Thank you for telling me. The official report was vague. Official reports often are, she replied. They record outcomes, not experiences. After a moment, she added, he spoke of you often. Said you had his strength but your mother's intelligence. He believed that combination would make you exceptional. Something shifted in Davenport's expression, a weight lifting. I've spent my career trying to be like him. Strong, fearless, dominant. I never considered that might not be enough. It's a common misconception among exceptional physical specimens, she said, a hint of dry humor in her tone. The strongest often have the hardest time accepting that strength has limitations. Is that why you concealed your background when you first arrived? To force us to confront our assumptions? Partially, she acknowledged. But also because respect earned through intimidation isn't respect at all. It's fear dressed as deference. I wanted to earn your respect through knowledge, not reputation. Well, you have both now, he said earnestly. The men talk about you differently. Not just as a legendary operator, but as someone who's teaching us to think beyond what we believed possible. She accepted this with a slight nod. Continue your adaptations, trainee. Your evaluation is in 3 days. As she turned to leave, he called after her. Major, thank you for not ending my career when you had every right to. Second chances are rare in our profession, Davenport, she replied without turning back. Make it count. 3 days later, the class gathered for their final evaluation. Commander Blackwood and several senior instructors had assembled to observe. The exercise combined physical challenges with complex tactical problems, all while dealing with sensory manipulation and resource limitations. Major Thorp stood at the front of the room. Today's evaluation will test everything we've covered over the past 7 weeks. You'll operate in teams of 4, rotating leadership based on changing conditions. The objective is to complete the mission while adapting to unexpected limitations and asymmetrical threats. She detailed the parameters, emphasizing that physical prowess alone would not ensure success. The team that best combines physical capability with cognitive adaptability will prevail. Remember, the goal isn't to be the strongest team. It's to be the most effective one. The evaluation lasted 6 grueling hours. Teams navigated complex environments while Thorp and the other instructors introduced unexpected variables, from simulated injuries to equipment failures to environmental hazards. Leadership rotated based on changing conditions, forcing each recruit to both lead and follow as circumstances dictated. Davenport's team, including Calloway and Fallon, demonstrated remarkable cohesion. When Davenport's injured shoulder became a liability during a climbing section, he seamlessly transferred leadership to Calloway, whose strategic approach navigated them through the obstacle. When sensory manipulation devices disoriented Calloway later, Fallon stepped forward with confident direction. As the evaluation concluded, the recruits assembled, exhausted but exhilarated. Major Thorp conferred briefly with Commander Blackwood before addressing them. Today, you demonstrated what this program was designed to achieve: cognitive adaptability under physical stress. You've learned to recognize when strength isn't the answer and to shift your approach accordingly. She made eye contact with each recruit. This knowledge won't just make you more effective operators. It will keep you alive in situations where physical prowess alone would fail. It will allow you to complete missions that would otherwise be compromised. Most importantly, it will bring you and your teams home. Commander Blackwood stepped forward. Major Thorp's program will now be incorporated into all Phase 2 training. You are the first class to complete it, which means you'll be the standard against which future classes are measured. Carry that responsibility with the seriousness it deserves. As the group dispersed, Thorp found herself alone with Davenport once more. Your team performed exceptionally well, she told him. Your ability to recognize when to lead and when to follow demonstrated true tactical maturity. I had a good teacher, he replied. One who showed me that admitting limitation isn't weakness. It's strategic awareness. She studied him thoughtfully. Your father never learned that lesson. It's why he didn't survive. You've already surpassed him in ways that matter most. Davenport straightened slightly, processing the weight of her assessment. That means more than you know, coming from someone who served with him. He would be proud of who you've become, she said. Not because you followed in his footsteps, but because you found your own path. 6 months later, Major Thorp stood on the sidelines of the graduation ceremony. The class that had once mocked her now stood at attention, receiving their insignias as fully qualified operators. Commander Blackwood presented each recruit with the trident that symbolized their achievement, offering personal words to each. When Davenport's turn came, Blackwood spoke loud enough for all to hear. Trainee Davenport has demonstrated exceptional leadership, tactical innovation, and cognitive adaptability. His performance in Major Thorp's program ranked highest in the class, setting a standard for future recruits to aspire to. As Davenport received his trident, his eyes found Thorp in the crowd. He offered a respectful nod that conveyed more than words could express. In that moment, he wasn't just receiving a symbol of his achievement. He was acknowledging the transformation that had made it possible. After the ceremony, as the graduates celebrated with family and friends, Thorp prepared to leave quietly. She had never been one for ceremonies or recognition. Her satisfaction came from knowing these operators would be more effective, more adaptable, and more likely to survive because of what she taught them. As she crossed the base toward her car, she became aware of movement behind her. Turning, she found the entire graduating class forming a line along her path. As she passed, each graduate rendered a crisp, respectful salute, a tribute to the operator who had transformed their understanding of strength and capability. At the end of the line stood Davenport, his salute as precise as the others. "Thank you, Major," he said as she passed. "For teaching us that true strength isn't about domination. It's about adaptation." She returned his salute with formal precision. "Remember that lesson when everything else fails, Operator Davenport. It will bring you home when nothing else can." Later that evening, Thorp sat in Commander Blackwood's office completing final evaluations. The program exceeded expectations, Blackwood said, reviewing the data. Injury rates down 30%, mission success projections up 18%. The cognitive adaptability metrics are particularly impressive. She nodded, signing the last report. They learned faster than anticipated, especially after the confrontation with Davenport. Sometimes the most effective lessons are the painful ones, Blackwood observed. "Speaking of which, how's the survivor's guilt these days?" She looked up, surprised by the directness of his question. "Still there. Always will be. But teaching these men, knowing they'll survive situations my team didn't, helps. You're making a difference, Major. Your team would be proud." Teaching them might be the most important operation of my career, she acknowledged quietly. As she left the base that night, carrying her single box of belongings, she glanced back at the training facility where a new class of recruits would arrive tomorrow. They would begin their journey unaware of who would be teaching them or the lessons that awaited. In the distance, she could see Davenport and his fellow graduates celebrating their achievement. They had entered the program believing physical dominance was the measure of an operator. They were leaving with the understanding that true capability transcended the physical, residing in the mind's ability to adapt when strength alone would fail. As Major Aloan Thorp drove away from the base, she carried with her the knowledge that her painful experiences had been transformed into lessons that would save lives. The quiet teacher had revealed herself as the warrior, and in doing so had created warriors who understood that the most important battles were fought not with the body, but with the mind.